All right, cool. Start again quickly, just to make sure everyone heard me. So I was just going to say, basically, I think tonight I'm going to try and tell you a bit of a story of how I found my way to DDD or trying to do DDD. I think when you think you know what you don't know what you, what's the saying? You don't know what you don't know, and you think you know more than you actually do. So, I think had a sense of encapsulation and kind of what contexts are, but not necessarily in the sort of formal terminology of what DDD was, right? So I didn't have formal training, and I actually never got around to reading Eric Evans' book, which I really should do. I've got a copy now, finally, but I need to read it. So I've relied quite heavily on good old Pluralsight, which, by the way, there's some excellent courses on, which I'll share at the end. So I thought Chris was mentioning, get some guys from the community to come chat about what they're up to. And I thought, well, I'm actually working on a little open source project, which is a passion project of my own. It's interesting to try and explain what it is. I still got to work on the pitch probably a bit better, but I thought this was an excellent opportunity for me to basically grow and learn and to try and use DDD, CQRS, events, sourcing, and any other cool and supposedly good patterns and practices for building software, right? So I've kind of, I suppose, as I've gone, I've kind of realized that some of these things are definitely not totally relevant. Some of them are definitely relevant. But yeah, this is sort of the journey of what I found so far, because it is technically not available yet. The source code is almost available. It's very close to MVP. But that's also, for me personally, another good motivation for coming here, because I love feedback. So if anyone can tell me what I'm doing right, what I'm doing terribly wrong, please speak up. Okay, so well, before I get there, who am I? Just so that we can get a sense of where I come from. So I'm a professional software engineer. I've been doing it for about 18 years now. Worked in various different industries, different businesses, different size software, different scale. I've got some certifications, if that means anything to anyone. I'm self-taught mostly. I didn't do a degree or anything like that. So I'm a bit of an autodidact. I sort of go out and try and find out what's going on. And I mean, my focus is sort of the web space, cloud space. So hence why the software is built as a web app, basically. It runs on the desktop, which is ironic. So, okay, so this is a quick disclaimer. I'm obviously right. I mean, I'm going to give you guys all the perfect answers, the silver bullets. There's nothing I can say wrong here. So, just kidding. I probably am going to be wrong about some stuff, and I'm sure there are many ways to achieve these same things or different things. So if anyone has feedback, or if you've got any questions or anything that relates to that, please chime in. But I'm probably going to be quite opinionated, so just take that with a pinch of salt. Okay. What is Astrana? Okay, so again, I think one of the chaps over here basically said to me, I went to Google to find out what Astrana is, and there was no website. There was very little up there. So obviously it's a new project, so one of the reasons there's not much. But if I was to try and summarize what it is, it's, as the quote on screen says, a software tool that facilitates healthy, constructive online connections. So some of you might be thinking, maybe also from the screenshot you would have saw on the cover, that this is just another social network or something like that. And you wouldn't be totally wrong. In some sense it is, because there is a very big social component to what the software is. But insofar as, for example, you want to share posts, you want to share pictures, you want to share videos, links, the kind of stuff we tend to share on the various platforms that are out there. But the idea is really that I'm tired of seeing adverts. I'm tired of mental clutter. I don't like the fact that people like to fight online as much as they do. I love debating, and I'm one of those people who get in there in the comments and talk a lot of nonsense. But I think there are healthier, more constructive ways to be online. So I thought, well, I'll create an alternative. No one else is doing it. And I also thought, well, the problem with this sort of thing is that the profit motive behind these things is a big problem, because it drives the need to sell things like adverts, for example. Things like language, for example, probably shouldn't be copyrighted or trademarked or sold. And I think this is sort of a case for that kind of technology, right? So just to quickly give you a quick overview of some of the key areas. Healthy connection. It's meant to be private and safe. That's another big thing. It's supposed to run everywhere. So Linux, Mac, Windows, it's another big learning curve for myself, being a .NET guy mostly and working mostly in the Windows sort of ecosystem or the Microsoft ecosystem. So yeah, that's sort of at a very high level what it is. And we'll probably get a bit deeper as I go. So, okay, very briefly, as I mentioned, I'm a Microsoft guy. Here's just a rough idea of some of the technologies involved. So when you look at the code, or when I show you some stuff, you kind of know why it's that particular code. So everything from Postgres and MySQL and SQL Server supported out the box. I'm using .NET Core, TypeScript, React, sort of more, I guess, modern, popular frameworks. All right, so this is where it starts to get more interesting, I guess. Being the only person who's really doing major development work on this right now, I don't suffer from the same problems that a big team would, or a big company, or even big software, because this is not big software. This is an application that runs on your computer or on a website, a bit like WordPress or any other website, right? So I'm the domain expert, I'm the developer, and I'm the customer at the moment. Although I'm lucky enough to have a group of friends and colleagues, so I've managed to kind of rope into this. In fact, my friend in the back, I'm going to point out Julian. He happens to be visiting at the moment in Australia, and I dragged them along. So they're real, they exist. But I'm primarily the person kind of responsible and driving it at the moment. So I'm sort of having to wear all three hats at the moment, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because I think one of the benefits, is Boyan probably pointed out, is when you've got a group of people, different backgrounds and perspectives, you get probably a much better view of what actually is needed and how it should work. So yeah, anyway, I think am I the developer? Yes, 100%, definitely a techie. Domain expert, kind of. I mean, I'm not a social media expert or online interaction expert necessarily, but I use the stuff, so I guess I'm not a total idiot. I hope. Am I a customer? Yes, I am a customer because I intend to be using this. So, while that's true, there are other people who have different reasons to use it. So, a bit of context around how I'm looking at this project, right? Okay, some of the design goals, I'll just quickly go into that very, very quickly. I'm just mindful of time, so I'm probably going to zoom through some of this stuff a little bit. I'm just trying to give you some more context around this, and then I think if you've got questions or any things that you want to raise, please just chime in. That's totally fine by me. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to achieve, single domain model. That's something I think that was the hook for me to get into domain-driven design. I like the idea that everything can kind of feed down from the single source of truth about what the software should be doing. Because in the past, you've seen people build like, this business logic class and that behavior class, and it very quickly becomes a mess with different things all over the place. So if there's sort of a practical way to kind of bring those things together into sort of one space where they'll kind of close together, that for me was like almost like the holy grail. I was like, that would be really good. So that I think what got me to, excuse me, to kind of look into domain-driven design. I want it to be very testable, because I don't want to have to do this work manually myself. I want to automate the hell out of it. Also, just good from a point of view of getting people to work with you. You can reliably make sure everything works. Easily localizable. I didn't want any dependency on any database providers. In fact, I really didn't want to have dependency on any one particular platform or place. But one of the things you'll see is I used Entity Framework, or EF Core, to implement my access to the data layer, because it enables that separation of concerns, which is very necessary for this. So that was one of the area. API first, I guess, an idea that, build the backend, whatever the front end had to be, it would be driven from the APIs. Highly secure. Chris, maybe you can chime in and give me the right terminology sometime in this talk, but this sort of hydratable idea is sort of, with event sourcing, the idea that you can kind of build up the history of an object or a particular entity is one aspect to it. But the other aspect to it, I guess, is I wanted to be able to have an ephemeral quality to the software, which is part of the mental health or the healthy aspect of the system. So that, unfortunately, nowadays, if you're a kid growing up, pretty much anything you do online, it's there forever, probably. So one of the things we want to do is build a feature that basically says it forgets. After a certain amount of time, it auto-forgets. It may be configurable so that you can choose what's a reasonable time frame, and maybe there'll be some sort of memory functionality where you could say, oh, I already want to remember that thing, but everything else kind of goes away. And that's a very interesting thing to try and do with events, because the idea is to keep the events basically forever, in some sense. One, because you need them for the history. But two, the other thing is from a security and auditing sort of point of view, you need to be able to trace back what happened. So being hydratable, so to speak, was a very important component to that. But that sort of comes in different shapes and forms in the system. Platform agnostic, as I said, simple for the noobs, right? So the idea was that, I mean, this is a project not just for me, ultimately. I mean, I'm driving it right now. I'm the God King. This is my project. You will do as I say. But ultimately, realistically, I actually want as much collaboration and outside, feedback and help as I can get. So to make this easy for people to get on board without having to learn a lot is a challenge. And again, I think DDD is quite a good thing for that, because you can kind of maybe narrow it down to a particular domain context and allow people to just focus in that little area, both from a business point of view, if you like, and also from a technology point of view. So another reason why I like DDD. Free and open source, lightweight performance, even though this is not at scale. I don't want it to take too long, because one of the aspects of this is peer-to-peer. So you install an instance on your computer, your phone, your tablet, your web host, your cloud instance, wherever. But everyone has a different internet connection. Everyone has a different type of hardware they're running things on. So there's a performance aspect of being able to connect all these things and then compose a feed reliably, which is quite an interesting challenge. Easy to build with strangers and friends. So again, the idea of open source, right? Being able to work with anyone, anywhere in the world. Maximum freedom of expression. So that is to build this so that anyone can express themselves however they want. I'm trying to build this thing as unopinionated as possible, right? So you can define your what your profile is all about, for example. Excellent usability, accessibility, right? Okay, cool. So that's sort of the context. All right, so DDD, very big topic. Lots of different ways to skin the cat, lots of different ways to build software doing DDD. I'm trying to tell you some of my experiences, and I was trying to think of things that would be relevant, that I could at least say something meaningful about. And these practical challenges are sort of the ideas that I came up with. So I would actually, if I can get a show of hands, I don't know if anyone, Boyan, if you're on the chat there by any chance, if you could see what anyone's saying, but I would love to know if there's any particular topic or in this group that is of particular interest, and maybe I can start there, just for the sake of time. Otherwise, I'll just kind of go through them very quickly, and then we can go deeper later.
I wanted to ask you to expand on the hydratable concept for me.
All right. That is a very difficult concept to try and expand on. I'll tell you what, I think throughout the talk, I'm going to try, because look, some of these things have quite a bit of overlap as well. And I think that the hydratable concept probably has a fair bit of overlap. So maybe what I can do is, as I go, I can try and point out aspects that of that idea that are relevant, and do it that way. All right, cool. So, okay, I think knowing what to build when, probably a big problem as well for anyone. It's also context-based. So what kind of business you have, what sort of team you have, what are the skills, what are you trying to achieve? There's all sorts of stuff. But yeah, for me, I mean, I'll tell you about like what I thought made sense as the person I'm on this particular project, working at the RM. So again, there's some interesting choices around, if you're going to pick Entity Framework Core or Entity Framework Classic to build software, versus Hibernate or one of the others, which I'm not that familiar with, but from what I've read, has some other good features of making it easier to actually create entities, particularly I think things around like being able to auto increment IDs, for example. There's certain things around how those ORMs manage state internally that are better or worse. And so there's trade-offs that you have to make when you choose one or the other. And we can maybe dig into that a little bit. Enforcing invariance. This is something that it's kind of very obvious, I think, but also it was challenging for me because I ended up trying to go the whole declarative approach. You know, if you're familiar with MVC and .NET, like there's a lot of these attribute classes you can decorate your methods and your classes with. And basically it kind of wires up into the pipeline that's already there that can automatically validate the input and stuff like that. But it's really cool. I like the idea of, declarative sort of based, almost configuration based programming in a way, but it has its challenges with DDD. I actually ended up going back, and you're going to see my code's very dirty. I'm doing a lot of refactoring at the moment. In fact, after I showed Chris very briefly, before we were talking about doing this talk, he was like, "Oh, it's actually more like, what I said was a command. It was actually more like a command handler." And I was like, "Oh yeah, you actually got a point there." So I'm busy refactoring. So we can look at that as well, like where to enforce invariance, like what makes sense, and how to practically do it. Model mapping, again, sort of related. Do you use AutoMapper? Do you use linked to SQL? Also linked to objects to do it manually? What's the approach? Syncing things back and front. So basically, like I wanted to enforce the domain from the single point of truth, which is basically the backend, the API. But how do I make sure that my DTOs and my entity objects and view models and whatever actually are easily, almost effortlessly synced between the front end and the back end. Not so trivial, I mean, not so easy actually. And then CQRS and events, I thought, well, I haven't really done too much on that yet. That is ultimately what I think is sort of still worth doing in this project. Maybe not at the kind of scale you'd see in others, but if we have a bit of time, maybe we can touch on that a bit. Okay, so and then some caveats, which I think I've sort of mentioned already. Part-time project and other developers, bear that in mind. Not-for-profit open source. I have a day job. I don't have a lot of time to spend on this, unfortunately. So I maximize my time. So I will take what would traditionally be considered more shortcuts, if you like, as a professional developer than what I would do now, which goes in line with the mixing prototype code with real code. So I'm sort of like, what's it, moving fast and breaking stuff, so to speak, at the moment. Once we get a release out that's available to everyone, I'll probably stop that a bit. Now, that's one thing I'm a bit upset at myself a bit. I haven't been working in one domain at a time, but it's sort of, to become the subject matter expert or the domain expert, I sort of needed to prototype and play around and experiment to figure out what I was doing and whether it actually made sense or not. Probably not the best practice in an ideal world, but maybe it makes sense. I don't know. Again, maybe you guys have an opinion on that you can share with me. And then another thing, which is sort of an endless debate, I guess, is should you do TDD up front? I love the idea of TDD and BDD, but I've not seen it in very many businesses, organizations actually practicing it like properly. It's sort of the funny part about that is that while I think it's actually a very good practice, it requires that 80% time up front to basically think things through and to build your test, to understand what you're doing before you do it, and then do it, the other 20%, right? Most businesses don't really operate like that. They don't really fully understand what they're building yet. And that unfortunately makes it difficult. I'm very much in that situation as the kind of go fast and break thing philosophy at the moment. So I would love to do more tests. I probably will write them in hindsight. But yeah, and then of course the other thing is, unfortunately my demo is based on live non-production code so it's messy and a bit dirty, but you should get the point. Okay, let's see. All right, so maybe this is where hopefully it gets a bit more interesting. I can actually show you some code. So I want to give you a quick overview of the solution itself, like how it looks physically, and then we can maybe start digging deeper into those things. So I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio as a starting point. Let me just share my screen. I'll move it over. Can't really see what I'm doing here, guys, because like the screen's over there. So forgive me if it's all over the place. All right, so in fact, what I can probably do if I'm very clever is I can go to Google Meetup. I can see what I'm doing. Let's see. I'm just trying to find the main screen. That's actually true. Yes, okay. Fair point. All right, let me just try that. Can this work? But I'm destroying my laptop. I'll like this thing quickly. All right. That work, guys? No? Alrighty. Sorry.
Oh, good. Let's see if we can quickly share that.
All right. Okay, is it not?
Yeah. Window. Where are we?
Yeah, perfect.
Boom.
That's not the entire screen. All right, my bad. Okay. Oh, there we go. Now I can actually see myself. Fantastic. Okay. All right. So this is going to be interesting as well because there's actually a delay from it arriving here from there. I might still have to do it this way. All right, guys. Let's try this. Okay. So basically, the solution is actually, I suppose, relatively big for what it is. If we just minimize everything, you should be able to see there is I guess I'm trying to follow the more sort of open source Linux style of structuring the project. I mean, .NET sort of Microsoft is sort of, I guess, recommending this approach more and more. So I guess it's more normal, but in the past you wouldn't have necessarily structured like this. So your main code sits in the SRC folder. There's a test folder with a bunch of test projects, which have corresponding projects for each actual source code project. There is a build folder, which has just a bunch of scripts and stuff I've got for Docker and building SSL certificates and a bunch of other stuff here. So it's all PowerShell and a bunch of other things. And then something there's docs here as well, which is just some information about what to do if you're getting started. And then something which I was sort of experimenting with, and I wish I got more into this, is spec flow for actually designing things up front as sort of requirements rather. But again, given the timeframes I had, I didn't really progress very far with that because it's sort of a little bit opinionated and I don't really fully understand the opinion about how to do it. So I've left that over there, but maybe one day I'll get into that. But then where the real meat and potatoes of this is in the SRC folder. And you'll see that there are, about 10? Yeah, about 10 or 12 projects. First one over here is sort of almost like, it's sort of the application, the runnable application where all the other projects are kind of referenced, and you run the program from here. And this references a bunch of the other projects, basically. So core is probably fair to say this is more like the shared kernel sort of aspect of DDD, if I could call it that. I really had to fight the urge to create a common solution. I really know that's a terrible idea, but when you just don't know where to put things, it can be a pain. So anyway, I just kind of went with core because they're sort of reusable across the board. And you'll see it's like common exceptions and stuff like that. Like let's see invalid user exception. When also got some extensions for like doing some string stuff and just reusable things. And then if we go a bit further down, you got the API. This really just houses a bunch of API controllers. So basically, these are the REST endpoints that are defined for the various different types of APIs that exist for the service. And then these, we can actually go into one just now, but these, like the post control is probably a good one. These sort of just reference what I like to think of as command handlers now, or useful business logic. And can I see what's going on here? Wait, what is this file? Sorry guys, I can't see. All right, cool. That's sort of, I'll just scroll down. I've got it on screen now. Okay, yeah, sure. Let's zoom in. Okay. If I can try and, does that help? It's not the shortcut, I'm afraid. And I'm also not using a mouse. So. There we go. How's that? The better? Come on. Come on, mouse. There we go. How's that? The better? All right, fantastic. So so there's like pretty lightweight sort of controllers. Mostly just trying to kind of take the input and then normalize it to some extent, or do some very basic validation, and then pass that sort of input along to a command or some other sort of business logic. Where's my mouse gone? Sorry, guys. There we go. And you can see here, right? So this is an example. Is this? Yeah. Okay. So there's our controllers. I'll try and dig in this a bit deeper just now. Oh God, I keep wanting to go back to the screen. Okay, so API controllers in that one. Then we have a data layer sort of project. This contains basically all the entity framework rules and the data contexts and entities for entity frameworks, not domain entities, so to speak. And then repositories, which, again, this is an interesting thing. I initially started with my repositories living in the data layer. But the more I got into looking at DDD and CQRS and these sort of patterns, I was like, well, actually, the practice says rather put that almost next to your other logic as a repository encapsulated, or at least more along those lines, right? Right now, I've literally got every repository for every other piece of functionality sitting in this project, except for post, which I'm slowly refactoring out to try and see if that actually makes more sense. So we can actually have a look at that quickly. Repositories, there's quite a few of them. And what I try to do is at least, there's sort of a pattern that I'm following, or convention almost, where the name of the folder or the directory in which each piece of functionality or feature lives is sort of mirrored in the corresponding domain or data layer. All right, so we continue down, just come through this quickly. we've got then a couple of other data kind of sub-projects, if you like. So these are sort of little hacks almost for Entity Framework core, because the intention is to support any sort of data source out the box. I don't really care what data source it is. At the end of the day, as long as it stores the data like reliably and it stores it efficiently, I don't really care if it's SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, or anyone else, or even a NoSQL database. I mean, that may very well work for the kind of data we're storing. I've just started with the ones I know. So those are why those have been chosen out the box. Also, as much as I like Microsoft, they're a company. And the whole point is to use as much open source software as possible that is free and available to anyone. So if one day they decide that SQL Express is not going to be something they make freely available, people should have options. So yeah, so that basically stores the sort of outputs of the migrations that are created for Entity Framework. Now, of course, right now I've kind of condensed it down to initial schema. I had a whole bunch, and then as I refactor, I just clean up a bit. But yeah, basically that's their sole purpose. And then this is, I guess, it gets interesting. The domain projects. This is sort of where I thought of actually housing the main business logic or the domain logic, the stuff that does the work of actually changing data or storing something or making something happen. But what I tried to do, and again, this is sort of counter to sort of what I think I understand by DDD, I try to separate out the models, what I think of as entities, or what people think of as entities maybe more, and I treated them as maybe light anemic models, and I put them in a models folder, a models project, sorry, which is just below here. Let me see where I am. Here we go. And again, corresponding folders and directories, which basically represent the same feature or functionality, but it's sort of doesn't quite work when you want to keep things self-contained. So again, refactoring stuff, but let's maybe look at the post as an example. So I was also probably quite wrong to do as many interfaces as I was, but I was thinking in terms of contracts. So, there's an interface that will define what a post should have, basically, at a minimum. And then tons and tons of different interfaces to define various aspects of that post, right? Or whatever the object is. And then basically, yeah, so there you got some options for basically used by the repositories or the domain services or behaviors, whatever the logic, it's shared basically across them. It's also a bit of a practical thing because, again, from a Visual Studio project point of view, or .NET project point of view, you're obviously going to have references to different projects and you don't want to create some sort of circular reference. So it sort of was handy in that respect too. Okay, so yeah, so that's sort of the domain models. And then there's just a bunch of other infrastructure related and framework related projects. In fact, the infrastructure one I don't really care too much about. It's sort of got logic for like accessing queues and other stuff I think I might need one day. But where it is sort of interesting is the framework is where I sort of house what I think are DDD kind of entities or objects or concepts. And I create an interface or a abstract class which I can inherit, so I can enforce basically common functionality for those types of entities, right, or those types of objects. So yeah, we can see we've got a domain entity. If we can have a quick look at that, maybe just so there's some common functionality in here which theoretically should be inherited by all types of entities, right? And then what else we got? Yeah, I derivative value objects, which I have yet to actually use at this stage, although I see some candidates potentially, things like addresses and stuff like that. But yeah, the intention here was basically that if we're going to do DDD, then make it practical, make it something that is obvious in the code. Yeah, so I don't know what else I can quickly show you here. I don't want to take too long. Yeah, so you can see like things that are deactivatable or auditable or that's sort of what my intention was here. One thing I did wrong, by the way, was when I first started building this out, I had this idea that anything that's editable should always have an ID, right? But that kind of conflicts a little bit with the idea of value objects and things like that. But with entities, that's perfectly fine. But it's sort of pointless to have an interface for it. So a base abstract class was better for that. Okay, cool. So I think hopefully that gives a very high level view of the project. Of the actual solution and structure. I don't want to think too long because we could probably go for hours into this. So let me think I'm going to stop sharing this and then move the. I'll very briefly show you the Visual Studio VS Code. What do you call it? Solution or project. This is again more of a UI. It's not really designed to be the domain model like Enforcer. The idea is that we could have a mobile app, we could have web apps. It wouldn't matter what app user interface is consuming the services, right? As long as they access the APIs in a valid way. All right, so what can I show you on this? So, oh wait, it's not sharing the screen. Give me a moment. So presenting, and then we'll share. This is your code. All right, hopefully the guys on the call can see this now. Cool, so this is mostly a React-based, TypeScript-based solution. The organization, I don't know if it's best practice or not. I've been working with React a little bit over the years, but I'm probably not a super expert. But yeah, basically sort of following the idea of, I can see this again, my mouse is gone. You got the idea of like services and components. There's quite a few different components in here for different UI elements, some type definitions. There's tons of different things, like post would be one of the main ones. What else? Yeah, so basically these things sort of just consume from the APIs, if that makes sense. So we can go look at those just now. Maybe when we go into like how to make things sync up in a moment, but quickly, very briefly, that's what that is. And then I will show you. In fact, I think what I'm going to try and do is just share the window, because mirroring. Problem is that I can't see my notes. Otherwise, I would very, very much do that. So let's see here. Yeah, it doesn't really give me that option, unfortunately. All right, doesn't matter. Or just entire screen. Oh, there we go. That actually is that'll do the job. Problem should be solved. All right. So cool. So then just very briefly as well, just for proof, there's the APIs. There's REST endpoints. Good old Swagger or Open API. It's a winner. And you can see there's quite a few endpoints here. So doing all sorts of stuff. So yeah, we'll dig into that a bit later if you're interested in that. Okay. I don't yet. Is that a nice way to your ubiquitous language still? It is difficult. One thing I wanted to do is I know there's tooling for creating DGML based models, diagrams, right? So I would actually like to at some point do that. I think in the last probably 2 or 3 months, I've probably built out so much stuff out of because you kind of build a base, and then all of a sudden you've got these pre-built fabricated pieces which you can just throw together and finally get some useful functionality out of. So I think I'm sort of at that point now. I do need to probably do that. Okay, let's see. How are we doing for time, guys? Are we all right? Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. All right. So then very quickly, what I'll do is I'll quickly just show you the application so you can see what it looks like from a user point of view. Okay. The unfortunate reality is there are no other peers. There are what I call peers, friends, connections, whatever you want to call them. I actually have got one set up locally, but because of the security I've built into this, the symmetric encryption key that I've got is so secure that I can't get into it. So I need to figure out how to do it because I've got it running in IIS, which is an interesting animal to work with security and access controller stuff. And so anyway, I can't access the registry, which is where things are stored to try and be as safe as possible. So I can't use that. So anyway, you don't see anything in the feed because it can't get data from anyone. So this is sort of very anemic. I'm sorry, I apologize. So what I will show you though is where I suppose the meat and potatoes again of most of the stuff is in people's profiles, because this is where the posts and stuff come from. Okay, cool. So again, all fake. Nothing really real. I mean, these are real photos. They're from some of my adventures in Sydney, but it's not a real profile, obviously. So yeah, I mean, as you can see, there's sort of. Oh, sorry. You guys are not. Say something. You're being very kind and don't say something. All right, there we go. Sorry. So let me go back to the home screen so that you can at least get that anemic view. You know what I was talking about a moment ago. And just a note, guys. I'll just throw this in there. This probably looks a lot like Facebook. And I'm sorry, Facebook, please don't sue me. I'm not trying to take any patents or any other copyright, but I basically use it as a model just to sort of build something out so I can get a sense of like how things could potentially look or work. Okay, so let's look at my fake profile. Let's take a second to load. This is local, but maybe not as performant. It's busy uncaching or caching. But yeah, it's like what you would expect to see on I guess a standard sort of social media platform. There's some photos from me doing Vivid. There's a bunch of random Lorem Ipsum posts. There's a fake John Wick peer. There's some videos with some emoticons. We can, I don't know if the sound will play or not, but yeah, videos do work. They're not fake. What else? There's the domain-driven design. It's a link to the meetup page. We have to have that, of course. Our standard photo by itself. That is from me in Botswana with some of my friends before we got attacked by a massive elephant. It was very peaceful 15 minutes before that. And then, yeah, just some other links, I guess. And yeah, so you kind of get the idea, right? So this is standard content. And surprisingly, I mean, most of you guys, I'm assuming, are developers or work in that sort of space. There's a lot of hidden functionality that make this possible. So, I mean, every image is uploaded has to hook into an antivirus scanning mechanism and optimizing file size and stripping data that should be private and all sorts of other stuff. So it's a lot. But I think the last thing I can quickly show you, just for what it's worth, is like, here's a poster. Again, sorry, Facebook. I'll just upload a picture or two. I don't know, maybe we'll find something here which is a bit different. Like, yeah, exactly. Well, that's actually part of the reason for this. It's sort of, there's a place for all these things. They're going to exist into the future no matter what. But we have a lot of public squares and what you could maybe think of more as private clubs that exist on the internet nowadays, or the mall, if you think of something like Amazon. But there's no living room. There's no porch or barbecue where you could just shoot the shit, so to speak, with your friends and literally talk the most abstract nonsense, and not be like have fear that your employer or someone is going to like take you very seriously on that thing, or be censored or whatever it might be. So yeah, and the corporate surveillance side of it as well, like constantly manipulating people to buy things they maybe don't need, or that sort of thing. So that is a big part of it. So I think the one I wanted to do here, not to waste too much time, is the Jurassic World one, because I love dinosaurs. I'm going to upload a bunch of and a couple of videos just to prove that this thing does something useful. Oh, of course, it has to be wrong in terms of its actual shape here. Oh, there you go. It resized. There we go. So we now got something happened with that video, apparently. Told you, there's still some bugs. There you go. It's real. And I can post this thing, and it should work. Yeah, well, it didn't refresh nicely because the attachment data is not being loaded. So again, I'll just refresh that for the sake of proving that it works. So yeah, so there's the idea is that there's going to be functionality to allow you to store data anywhere you want it. So if you've got iCloud, Dropbox, Google Drive, Azure Blob Storage, S3 bucket, whatever floats your boat, whatever you trust, or wherever you have data already, I just have connectors that can proxy it through for you, so you don't have to move things around. But there's obviously a baseline file system support. So the idea is that at the moment it just uploads to a files directory on that you specify configure, and then it will proxy things through. I mean, if you look at these images, if we try and open the image in what is the image link, open a new tab, then you should actually see the address will say something like proxy as the address, right? To kind of, again, from a security privacy point of view, you don't want to give access to your data by accident. So that's an important part of it. Yeah, and then I guess one last thing I can do is, let's see. I mean, there's an image viewer as well, right? Okay, so that's what's there. That's the if I can see this cross, where is it? There we go. That's sort of the application. That's sort of roughly the solution setup. And I think hopefully you've got a good sense now of what this thing is roughly about, right? Okay, so let's maybe start looking into the next question here with code and stuff. Where is my mouse? we got it back. All right, so I'll just switch my presentation mode again. All right, where were we now? So the next thing was just challenges. All right, cool. Knowing what to build. I'll touch on this briefly because I think this is a very difficult one to kind of answer just, with a silver bullet for anyone, because it depends on your specific situation. But for me, the biggest challenge was knowing what to build from a basic feature point of view. Like, what do people care about? I mean, I like posts. I could write long essays about what I believe and what I'm interested in and whatever. But some people just couldn't care less. I mean, I've got friends and colleagues who I mentioned this to, and they're like, "Oh, it's kind of cool idea, but I don't really care." So like, you need something where you can like create a pinboard or a gallery, because I like pictures and I like being able to create collections of stuff. So there was a process of me literally just talking to people and building stuff as I go. Like, oh, what do you think of this? And what do you think of that? And then slowly, incrementally agile, if you like, built up the functionality as I went. And then obviously the more people who said, yeah, this is looking good, the more I was like, okay, I'm on the right track. But yeah, from a domain-driven design point of view, I guess what I did as well initially was I sort of started as CRUD. What maybe you would think of as CRUD. I think all applications are sort of CRUD, right? I mean, there's no denying that thing has to be created, edited, or updated, deleted, and read at some point, right? So the only question is, how do you think about it? Are you thinking about it in terms of create, read, update, and delete? Or are you thinking about it like what the business objective or the organizational objective is, the domain objective, if you like? And those things are just simply, enablers of that. So there was a shift from kind of actually pretty early on, so almost 2 years ago when I first started properly working on this, from doing CRUD. But there's still some legacy tidbits of code lying in there from like some of the repositories that I built in terms of how I was creating and saving stuff. And that sort of changed quite a bit when I started watching, I think it's Vladimir Kirov. You may know the name, Chris. He's got some very, very good practical insights on Pluralsight and courses he's done. And the idea that your entities actually should sort of be used across the entire stack, or all the different layers of your software, was something that I think initially didn't think was actually that practical, funnily enough. Mostly because of things like Entity Framework, where I was worried that, because I've had past experience when it was back Entity Framework, well, EF Core now, but it was Entity Framework back in, I don't know, 2014 or 15 or 16, somewhere around there. And it was version 4.5 or 4.3 or 5 or whatever it was. And it was sort of like, it was cool. It was really good, but it was still had some issues like around like what you could and couldn't do with it. It was a bit more opinionated maybe in how you do things. So to be able to use your entities, the very same classes as your entity framework entities, wasn't practical always. So I kind of defaulted to, one, I think this is going to be a problem from experience from a long time ago, and two, I don't know this new stuff well enough, and I just decided, well, I'm going to map everything using like a mapping library like AutoMapper. So I've got AutoMapper still built in, and I'm sort of moving away from that now. So I'm sort of, like I said, there's a bit of overlap with some of this stuff. So I'm going to actually just move on from what if, and kind of maybe move on to the entity framework or the ORM side of this, because I think that's quite an interesting area to kind of deal with. So let's just see my notes here. I'll remind myself what I wanted to mention. So, I mean, I think the first thing, when you start doing DDD properly, you start reading about it and you start actually trying to implement, what you realize is that actually I don't want to oversimplify it, but it actually mostly comes down to encapsulation. That's what it's about. I mean, contexts or encapsulation at a bigger scale, bounded context at a bigger scale. Encapsulation in the class, development, programming kind of sense, yeah, it's the same thing, but in a class, right, in an object. So again, entity framework is just, again, it's a sort of way of encapsulating the data model instead of your domain model. And it's weird because, I mean, I've been doing this for 18 years and I still find myself not thinking about things sometimes in terms of encapsulation or, I don't know, solid principles or some other well-known aspect, or what's it, object-oriented design, what's it? No, it is a principle. I'm just, the word evades me now. Oh, God, encapsulation and the other really big one. Polymorphism is one aspect of it. There's another one. Separation of concerns and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, you get my point, I think. Can't think. So most of these things are just different names for the same fundamental principle, I think. And we get kind of bogged down in the framework or the actual implementation of some of the stuff. So yeah, I think so. That was one thing I wanted to really just highlight, is that you'll find yourself when you do this stuff, you might get bogged down in the tool or the framework that you're working with. Just be aware that what you should care about is encapsulation. Don't. Or there was, I think the saying is, public getters, private setters is the kind of, I guess, wisdom that you should kind of stick to, because at the end of the day, it comes down to trying to reduce the amount of possibility for complexity growth, right? So exponential complexity growth. So create fewer touch points or places for things to manipulate and change state, whether that's an entity framework or in your domain entities, and you probably find yourself having a lot less problems to deal with later. And I'm lucky because I'm just one guy. The minute you have a team and you got people building stuff kind of in parallel and at scale, your problems just become infinite. So yeah, I would recommend that. Another thing maybe worth mentioning is, like I said, I initially sort of thought AutoMapper was a good solution because I was like, I don't want to do the mapping. I don't care about the mapping. Let this thing do it for me. I'll just create the definition and then never have to deal with it again. No, not really. No, not quite. AutoMapper can work, I guess. Like, you know, if for me, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to map things one-to-one and reuse my entities. And that to an extent, that is actually true. There are still some trade-offs that I have to make with certain properties or methods whatever within those domain entities compared with what's available in the data entity, if you like. So what Vladimir, Horikov likes to say is basically recommends fluent mapping is better. So basically, he uses the built-in features of LINQ and C#, and he just writes some logic that actually handles the mappings for him. The downside there is, and one of the reasons I also was trying to avoid that was it requires manual effort, and you have to keep things in sync. I mean, once you've got them, like what I've tried to do is keep that logic again sort of close to the entities themselves as well. So, for example, maybe what I can do is actually just switch out the code for a second and just show you that. There is the post is probably a good example. You'll have a post entity and that, or domain entity, and that will be turned into a DTO at some point, and it'll be turned into a data entity or F4 entity at some point. There you go, posts. So it's almost, oh God, I'm in the wrong place again, because you see, this is why it would be better to have the models and everything together. See the other project. Models, is this right? Can I see what I'm doing? Posts. Here we go. All right. So we look at post over here. This one should be up to date. This is the one that, this is like a key functionality, so I've started refactoring here. You will see, I just want to quickly get this on my screen as well again. Here we go. All right, so you'll see there's logic now baked into the entity itself for converting, if I can find my mouse again, geez. Can't see this thing, sorry guys. There we go. Okay, so you can kind of see that an entity can take a DTO as a parameter, and then it will map at that point in the constructor the values that it needs, right? And in that point, you can also do all your invariants and your validations and checks to make sure that the state is valid. So yeah, and then I mean, what's another thing I try to do is basically like if you've got like there's a method here for the standardized method for converting this into a DTO. Now, this is not a silver bullet itself. I mean, this is probably just going to solve maybe 80%, I don't know, maybe 90%. I'm yet to see the exact extent of how much this is going to solve the problem of having to rewrite code and do more mappings in certain cases. But I think for most scenarios, this will probably work. Occasionally, you might have to have a special case where you write code which does the mapping again, you know, in some scenario, let's just call it. But yeah, I find this quite good. Then on that note, I think just to point out that domain entity, aggregate entity. Okay, so this is one of those base entities that I've kind of built out. This thing inherits from domain entity. Again, actually, just a note on that, maybe this probably looks quite anemic. Like there's not a lot going on in this aggregate entity object. And the reason is it's not ready for the functionality in this particular instance. This is so that it's obvious to the person who's reading the code and writing the code that the intention behind this was just that this is an aggregate. Follow the DDD principles of like encapsulating the other entities inside the aggregate. So it's just a handy way to help work with other people, basically. But then there's some meaningful code, if you like, in the entity itself. Yeah, so there's some logic here, basically, for names, which help with logging and showing some helpful error messages. And then there's a whole bunch of other logic for how to do comparisons with entities. So if you want to do equality, I think also a lot of people overlook this, at least in my experience. People often write classes which don't actually have any sort of logic for equality comparison. And again, maybe not all the scenarios you need to do that, but it's probably quite handy to just have off the bat as a base bit of logic for any object. Yeah, and there's some other stuff for doing comparisons. And then one thing I'll show you also as an artifact, which kind of goes again towards the invariant stuff, is, and this was almost a mistake, I think, on my part, although I was very proud of it at the time, is the idea was, again, I wanted to create this so that, oops, it's a bit too far. I wanted to go to make this so that the next person to come and work in this doesn't have to think about validating things. They need to decorate the properties with their appropriate conditions, right? So if I want something to be a string of X characters long, or a number between a certain range, or an ID type, or whatever it might be, then I just decorate it with the appropriate attributes, and voila, and then make sure that I implement the validate method that from the interface that's inherited from, and everything should work. So I have this really nice, I like to think was very nice, validation logic, a little helper, which basically will give you a standardized validation result, which I guess is still useful. But then right towards the bottom here, here we go, all the logic needed to read through reflection all the different attributes that can exist for validation purposes. And actually, it works pretty well. I've got to be honest. I mean, I'm not saying it's the most performant thing because you're using reflection, right? But in my particular scenario, that's irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. We're not doing enough for it to be a problem. But where the problem comes is that now I've got rules here, and I haven't got rules in my entities. And I got to sort of, how do I make these things play nice? So what I'm probably going to end up doing, I think, and maybe I won't, but I think what I'm going to probably do is keep this functionality in some shape or form, but then make it something that I can reuse inside the entities themselves, so that it's sort of housed there or closer. Because I think there are still cases where using or having a validatable sort of attributes like this is useful, and that's particularly on things like view models or input models. And again, this is another area where I was like, well, okay, so now I've got these domain entities, I've got these data entities, I've got these DTOs between the different layers, I've got view models, and I've got input models, if you like. I don't want to have to put attributes on every single one of these things. I don't want to have to validate every single one of these things separately. And I also don't want to pass my domain entity. It's actually not advisable to pass my domain entity all the way down the stack to the API endpoints, and then into the UI somehow. Or maybe not even between other domains within the actual application. So it became my question, oh, this is going to be so much work to maintain. I don't want to do this. And I'm still, to be honest, I haven't really solved it. I think my default sort of position on this is probably just, it has to be done this way. Otherwise, you become too inflexible, too brittle, and you kind of coupled to all the other logic, which you really don't want. That's a much worse evil in my mind. So something else just to bear in mind. You may find yourself running into things like that. All right. I don't want to focus too much. Are there any questions or any insights or thoughts at this stage before I continue? I can maybe touch on. Yes.
Sorry, I may not be like too clear as to like the objective. But are you hoping to kind of like help us understand how to kind of make this application?
Probably not, because I suspect that your usage or what you're going to do in your life and your work experience is going to be different, just because of whatever it is that you do, right? There's different needs. What I'm trying to do, I think, is just show you what I did in my scenario and how maybe that may overlap with what you do or what you could be doing. I'm, as much as I wanted to say, yes, I have all the answers, unfortunately, I think there's lots of ways to skin the cat. So yeah, it's just hopefully a story that you can use for your own future challenges, let's just say. Yeah.
Thanks for showing that. I think it's a unique perspective. We don't always get to see a single individual's mindset on that main group model.
Yeah.
What's your next?
With this project, or domain-driven design?
You plan to integrate more of the domain-driven model to this as well?
Yeah, over time. Yeah. So sorry, this is probably taking quite a while, but very lengthy thing to get into. But I think what I would like to do is increasingly, well, first we'll refactor everything so that it is better aligned to the entities, aggregate entities, value objects. The real meat and potatoes of domain-driven design. I like to think anyway. And ultimately, I want to implement CQRS as well. I mean, also it's kind of cool just to do it, but also I think there's a use case for it here. I think there's a lot of value in being able to simply be able to have your commands running in one silo, if you like, and then the reads and the data coming back in a totally different silo. There's definitely benefit to that. And I think events, even in something as small as this, is still a useful model for messaging in an application. So I do want to go that way eventually. And I've started looking at like building event buses and stuff like that. A lot of it's just sort of code that's stubbed out. It's not doing much at the moment. I mean, there are notifications that get generated right now, but it's because the code gets called directly. It's not actually using the bus. So I want to replace that stuff with, CQRS sort of style patterns and event sourcing and all those good things. Got a question? You look like you're nodding away. I'm not sure if you're agreeing or if you got something to say.
Great, so much code.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. On that note, sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to say, like, I think it's very difficult to find one area of this to say, oh, cool, this is applicable to everyone. But if there's interest, I'd be more than happy to kind of, if there's something that someone likes or whatever, we could use this as a model. I thought this is quite a nice opportunity because being open source code, anyone can access this. It's aside from my own interest of like, hey, come look how cool my cool project, use it, I think genuinely for the community, it's quite a good thing because most code is proprietary. You don't have access to it. You don't have the opportunity to actually dig deep and see how things fit together. So if anyone is interested in this, I'm happy to come back at some point and maybe dig into whatever people are interested in. Prepare better. Thank you. Any other questions on that front?
It's not like taking one of the examples out of like a textbook, but like fleshing it out to a full application.
Yeah.
Plenty of interpreters.
Yeah.
I think more so than just having it as a textbook. I appreciate that this is so rare to see, especially CD engineers are very, very experienced. I can't comment on that. I've created some of the basic, but very rare to see principal people sit up there and expose their journey, expose their potential flaws, and allow other people to see that journey and that evolution. And I think that's fortunate more just to learn before you ever get into an enterprise commercial application.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That was part of my intent, as much as I would like to use this as an opportunity to promote the idea of this project. I genuinely, that is something I think is important because, I mean, I think if you're senior in the community or in the profession, you're okay. People will hire you because you've got experience. But a lot of junior people, a lot of new people coming into the industry, they don't know this stuff. And I don't know what opportunity they have really to play with these things. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah. How are we doing on time, by the way? Because I got a feeling I'm 5 more minutes. Okay, all right. Probably could talk a lot of other things. So I guess are there any other questions, any other thoughts before I wrap up that something I can quickly dig into? Is anyone from the chat? Sorry, we haven't been looking at this. Let's see here.
Yeah, good question. The one from Lee.
Lee, yes.
Do you support different user types like admin, contributor, etc.?
Okay, so that's a very good question, I guess. So an important part of this is that this is not like a centralized network in the sense that there's someone who hosts it and then you get multiple accounts. There's actually only one account. Technically, there's one other one. That's for Granny, because Granny's not going to sign up an account and create an instance because she's just too technically illiterate to do it. So you still wanted to see your pictures and your posts and whatever and stepped at it, but it's a very, very anemic sort of account. It's just a way to have an identity that allows them to log into view what's read-only access to certain basic stuff. But essentially, each instance is a representation of the person, theoretically. You may, if I go back to the logo for a second, again, this is part of the ideas behind this, but there we go. That's probably a bigger picture. There's the logo. Might change. Yeah. To quote Uncle Roger. My girlfriend makes me watch too much Uncle Roger. He's good. There's the logo over here on the right hand side. Sorry, left hand side. The idea is that well, the name as well. Sort of the idea is that the internet is sort of a tool for touching some ephemeral, digital, non-real part of the world or other people, right? You're not physically present. So it's sort of the metaphor for me when I was thinking of this is it's sort of like astral traveling or astral projection. The idea that you can project your essence, your soul, your spirit, whatever you want to call it, across to have some sort of tangible impact somewhere in the world using the internet or the web. So the logo there is sort of like I was trying to go for the whole Doctor Strange thing. If you remember, where he's like as he gets out of his body, like these multiple layers or levels of his soul rippling out. But yeah, essentially the idea is that every instance, to come back to the original question, is a representation of that single person, because we are individuals. We're not communities per se. We're not groups. The groups and the communities they're an emergent property of individuals. So I think it's more natural or closer to what it is to be human for this to represent you as more of a direct extension of yourself. Whereas I think most of the online networks, and again, for good reasons, I'm not saying there's no good reason for it, but they're centralized in some way. There's someone who has to administer it. Someone has to manage it. Someone has to pay for it. And if someone one day decides, nah, I don't want to do this anymore, that's gone. Like I think Mastodon, for example, is a very good, I like Mastodon. I think it's quite a good piece of software. But I think it's not far enough away from what you get in centralized business networks. And I think that for that reason, I think this approach is why, well, this is why I took this approach. So yes, you don't have multiple accounts, unfortunately.
It's like with Mastodon, there's a server.
Yes. Correct. It's directly peer-to-peer. It's almost like having LimeWire or Napster, one of those things back in the day where you literally would connect to other people, except they're trusted, people you actually know. There's no concept of finding someone you know. There's no, hey, you should follow this. There's none of that discovery. This is more like having WhatsApp or an email address where you say, give me your address, and then I'll connect. I'll send a connection request, and I'll approve it. And the intention is also so that you don't just add random people. You connect. You're actually real. Like it's people you know. And there's none of that shareability stuff. Like, there's great power in being able to share information quickly with these networks. But it's also, if it's good information, sensible information, safe information, that's great. Get it out as fast as you can. But the minute it's bad information or harmful, you've got a big problem. So these systems are not designed to handle that situation. But we already have natural ways, biomimetic ways, if you like, that we can handle these things. But you need to slow it down a bit so that the community and the people around you can go, whoa. That doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. So anyway, I'm trying to bring it back to the real, if that makes sense. So yeah, healthy online connection. Question, sir.
So if you do intend to grow, how do you intend to, or like, how do you intend to, make this idea?
I think there's intrinsic value. Sorry, I don't know if the people on the call can hear the question, but I'll just read it back just to be safe. Yeah, okay, so just to summarize, basically the question was, how do you grow this? What is my intention for making this something that people use? There's a part of me saying, I actually don't care. Like, there's intrinsic value. If you don't see it, that's your problem. Like, I'm amazing, the software is amazing, obviously. No, what I mean by that is there's intrinsic value insofar as there's less ads or no ads, there's less clutter, there's more connection. It's designed to be better in those ways, and I think that's a good reason to use it. I think the fact that it's more private and more secure is probably also a good reason. There's lots of different reasons why different people might see value in it. So to try and sell it to everyone in the same way, it would be difficult. And of course, being to some extent at least social. Again, it's not really designed to be a network per se. That's an emergent property of this. But to be social, there's sort of a critical mass. You need to have people you can talk to and friends to connect with in order for it to be useful. So it's sort of a chicken or the egg problem. So I have a group of friends. I've got a group of about, I think it's 12 of us, which are contributing to this in some shape or form. Then there's another layer of people who are like, yeah, we like your idea, we'll support you, and we'll, when it's ready, we'll test it for you. And then there's people like, only when it's production ready. So there's like a small group of people who will be the seed for growing. And then in time, it will hopefully become something that more people use. Like, I don't think it's going to replace everything. Like, for example, I think Mastodon's still quite useful. I quite like the idea of the whole Fediverse. And I think the idea would be to build some of the functionality in to make it easy to discover or to connect content in a safe way. So on that note, something I didn't really touch on is your feed is your community feed. It's the people you're connected with. But there's actually a newsreader. I'm bringing back RSS, guys. The ability to have content hosted anywhere other than some private network that you can pull in. So if you want to follow news, that's fine. Subscribe as a part of the feed. But that there's a deliberately separated tab for news and for external content. So if you don't want to be bombarded with that, like you are in the Facebook feed right now, where I just get like 80% adverts, pages that I should like, groups that are doing stuff that I don't really care about most of the time, you can kind of separate those concerns out a bit better. But you can still connect. So yeah, anyway.
Just contextualize the idea for you. Is this something that you actually spoke about before?
Yeah.
Your hobby project. Is this something you spend your entire life doing to pay your mortgage? Is it something that you sort of do when you put a bit of time because you dig it? And
Right.
take you down the learning side, or maybe something happens. What's the context?
Okay, so for those who couldn't maybe hear on the call, just in case, the question was basically, why am I doing this? Essentially, like, what is it because it's a hobby project, is something I'm passionate about, or is this something that could become a business, or do I want to make money out of it? It's very much a hobby project and a bit of a passion, like a public good. I think there's a need for something like this. I want this personally, so for that reason alone. Like, I can be selfish about it. So no, I think I want this. I'm going to do it. I'm a developer. I got to keep up with the times. Working on this stuff gives me an opportunity to learn, to become better, to polish my skills. And then I guess also the benefit is that society hopefully benefits from something like this ultimately. But the thing is, it'll never, I didn't do this to make money at all, because I think fundamentally you need this not to be for profit. The profit incentive will fundamentally pervert what this is. In the same way that Facebook or Twitter and the guys have to monetize for ads. And I mean, again, don't blame them. Like, they got to make money somehow. But that means you end up getting more crap content and more stuff that isn't relevant to you. More corporate surveillance, more censorship essentially online when they worry that they're going to get in trouble if someone says something, even if it's not that big a deal, because they'll do it preemptively. So there's room for something like this, and I think that we need, but it cannot be for profit, because it'll change its nature. It'll start creeping in the same way WhatsApp. When they sold to Facebook, they were like, you can't integrate this in a way that like you sell ads or stuff in WhatsApp. But then a few years later, I think 4 or 5 years later, they're like telling the guys, look, sorry, we're integrating this Messenger now on Instagram. We're going to make this ecosystem. And this is what it is. Try to stop us. So yeah, for me, it's more for public good, basically. Maybe one day it'll become something else. Who knows? Or there'll be some, I mean, most open source, if they make money, it's like services around it. But in terms of time, I just love doing this. So I spend a lot of time. My girlfriend probably hates me. She spends way too much time. She's very accommodating, because I'll do this after hours on the weekends most of the time. So yeah. All right, I'm pretty sure my time's up by now, and it's not really that technical. So thank you very much, guys. I hope there was some use. Yep. Cool.